September 1764. A ship called the Sally sails out of Providence, Rhode Island, and turns south toward the open Atlantic. In her hold, she carries a single cargo. Not tobacco, not timber, not molasses. Rum. 17,274 gallons of it. And that rum is not being taken to market to be sold to colonists. It is money. It is going to the coast of West Africa to be exchanged for people. This was not unusual. It was the business model of an entire region. The merchants of Rhode Island financed more than 1,000 slaving voyages. They carried over 100,000 enslaved Africans across the ocean, and the currency that made those voyages possible, the thing that was handed over on the beaches of Africa in return for human beings, was very often a barrel of rum distilled a few streets away from the harbor where the ship had been built. All of it. For the bottle sitting in your cabinet right now, the base of your mojito, the thing somebody is pouring over ice on a beach at this exact moment, on a coast where all of this actually happened. But the story of rum does not start on a slave ship. It starts with garbage. Barbados, the middle of the 1640s. To understand where rum comes from, you have to understand what a sugar plantation actually is. It is not a farm. It is a factory built in a field. Sugarcane is cut, crushed, and boiled down into crystallized sugar. And in the 1640s, that sugar was one of the most profitable substances on Earth. Barbados was covered in it. The island had been almost completely stripped of its forests and replanted edge to edge with cane. The transformation had been astonishingly fast. Only 20 years earlier, Barbados had been a place of small farms growing tobacco and cotton, worked mostly by European indentured servants. Then sugar arrived, brought by planters who had learned the techniques in Dutch-controlled Brazil, and everything changed. Sugar demanded enormous amounts of land, enormous amounts of capital, and above all, enormous amounts of labor. The small farms were swallowed up into vast plantations, and the labor was increasingly enslaved and African. By the 1660s, the island that had once grown tobacco was one of the most valuable pieces of land in the English-speaking world, and one of the most brutal. But refining sugar produces a problem. When you boil cane juice and draw off the sugar crystals, you are left with a thick, dark, sticky liquid that will not crystallize no matter what you do. It is called molasses, and in the early years, the planters had no idea what to do with it. There was too much of it. It could not be sold for much. It attracted insects. It fermented in the heat, and it piled up around the boiling houses in enormous, useless, stinking quantities. Some planters dumped it into the sea. Some fed it to their pigs. It was industrial waste, a byproduct of the real product, which was sugar. And then somebody discovered what happens if you let it ferment on purpose. Molasses is full of sugar the refining process could not extract. Leave it in the tropical heat with a little water and wild yeast goes to work. Within days, it begins to bubble and turn alcoholic. Distill that fermented liquid, and you get a raw, ferocious, clear spirit that could take the top of your head off. Nobody recorded the exact moment. There was no inventor, no eureka. It emerged quietly across dozens of plantations, out of the simple fact that the Caribbean was drowning in fermentable garbage, and enslaved and indentured people were looking for any relief they could find. The early results were not pleasant. This was not the smooth, aged, caramel-colored rum you know today. It was violent stuff, and the names the people of Barbados gave it tell you everything. They called it Kill Devil. They called it Rumbullion, an Old English dialect word that seems to have meant a great tumult or uproar, which is probably where the word rum itself comes from. A visitor to Barbados in 1651 wrote the first clear description we have. He called the drink made on the island a hot, hellish, and terrible liquor. Hot, hellish, and terrible. That was the review. And on the strength of that review, rum was about to conquer the world. Because the planters had just realized something that would change the economics of the entire Caribbean. The garbage was not garbage anymore. The molasses they had been throwing into the sea could be turned into a product that never spoiled, that could be shipped anywhere, and that people would do almost anything to get. They had found a way to sell their own waste. And the waste, it turned out, was worth more than they could possibly have imagined. By the 1650s, Barbados was doing something new in human history. It was not just growing a crop and selling it. It was running an integrated industrial operation on an island in the tropics, decades before the word industrial would mean anything at all. Cane in one end, sugar and rum out the other. Nothing wasted. The distilleries multiplied. Every large plantation built one because it made no sense not to. You already had the molasses. You already had the heat. You already had the enslaved labor. Turning your waste stream into a second product cost almost nothing and doubled what your land could earn. And the demand was extraordinary because rum did something no other product of the plantation could do. It solved problems. For the plantation owners, it was a tool of control. Rum was handed out as a reward, used to blunt exhaustion, folded into the brutal daily machinery of the plantation. It was cheap to make, and it was always available. For the wider Caribbean, it was currency. Hard coin was scarce in the colonies. Rum was not. It was traded for goods, used to pay debts, and accepted almost everywhere. A barrel of rum was as good as money, and unlike money, you could make it yourself out of the thing you had been throwing away. And for the sailors and soldiers of the European empires fighting over these islands, rum was something else entirely. It was medicine, morale, and escape, all in one cup. There is a detail here that captures how completely rum took over. In the sugar colonies, distilled spirit became so central that it was used to pay for the very thing that produced it. Plantation records show rum being used to purchase equipment, to settle accounts between merchants, and to compensate the ship captains who carried the sugar to Europe. A substance that had been thrown into the sea a generation earlier was now, on some islands, functioning as a parallel currency. The spirit spread outward from Barbados along every shipping route in the Atlantic to Jamaica, which would become the most famous rum island of all, to the other sugar colonies, French, Dutch, Danish, each developing its own style, and north, up the coast of North America, to a cluster of small towns in New England that were about to build their entire economy on it. Because here is the thing about rum that made it so much more dangerous than sugar. Sugar could only be grown in the tropics, but rum could be distilled anywhere you could ship molasses. And there was a place in the north, cold, rocky, with deep harbors and a fleet of fast ships that was perfectly positioned to buy Caribbean molasses cheap, distill it into rum, and sell that rum into the most profitable trade on earth. That place was New England. And what they chose to do with their rum is the part of this story that people do not put on the label. There was a reason the distillers of the North produced a rum that no colonist would ever willingly drink. And we will get to exactly what that reason was. In 1655, an English fleet captured Jamaica from the Spanish. The Royal Navy sailors who took the island found it awash in cheap, powerful local rum. And the timing could not have been better, because the Navy had a problem it had been struggling with for a very long time: water. On a long voyage, fresh water stored in wooden casks went slimy and foul within weeks. It was disgusting, and it was dangerous. For years, the standard solution had been beer, a gallon a day per man, but beer was bulky, it spoiled, and it took up enormous space that a warship needed for guns and cargo. Rum solved all of it at once. It did not spoil. It took up a fraction of the space. It could be mixed into questionable water to make it drinkable, and the men, unsurprisingly, preferred it. So the Royal Navy made it official. Every sailor would receive a daily ration of rum, half a pint of pure, overproof spirit, every single day. Think about that for a moment. The most powerful navy on earth, the institution that would go on to control the oceans of the world for the next 2 centuries, ran on a daily allowance of rum handed to every man aboard. There was, predictably, a problem. Half a pint of overproof rum, consumed all at once by a sailor on an empty stomach, produced exactly the results you would expect. Drunkenness, accidents, insubordination, and men falling from the rigging. The solution came from an admiral named Edward Vernon. In 1740, Vernon ordered that the rum ration be diluted with water before it was handed out, and sweetened with a little sugar and lime to make it palatable. Vernon was known to his men by a nickname, taken from the grogram cloak he wore. They called him Old Grog, and so the watered rum he invented took his name. They called it grog. That lime, added almost by accident to make the drink easier to swallow, would later help protect British sailors from scurvy and earn them a nickname of their own that has lasted to this day, limeys. The ritual became one of the most fixed features of life at sea. Every day at a set hour, a bell would ring and the cry would go up, and the men would line up to receive their measure, poured from a great tub often marked with brass letters reading "The King, God bless him," or "The Queen, God bless her." The daily tot was so central to a sailor's life that it was used as currency between the men themselves. Favors were paid for in rum, debts were settled in rum, punishments were measured in the stopping of a man's ration. An entire social economy ran on that half pint. The Navy ration would survive in one form or another for more than 300 years. And where the Navy went, so did rum, and so did the men who had learned to love it and then deserted, or been discharged, or turned to a different line of work entirely. The great age of Caribbean piracy ran on rum. The pirates of the early 1700s, the ones whose names you know, operated in exactly the waters where rum was cheapest and most plentiful. They drank it, they traded in it, they raided ships carrying it. The image in your head of a pirate with a bottle of rum is not a Hollywood invention. It is, if anything, an understatement. There is a reason the pirates and the rum trade overlapped so exactly in time and place. The same Caribbean that produced oceans of cheap spirit also produced a steady supply of desperate, skilled, violent men, sailors abandoned when a war ended, crews cheated of their wages, deserters from brutal naval discipline. They knew these waters. They knew where the rum ships sailed. And in an economy where rum was money, a cargo of it was as good as a chest of coin. Piracy did not sit beside the rum trade. It fed on it. For about a century, this is what rum was. A wild frontier spirit. The drink of sailors and pirates and frontier taverns, bound up with adventure and violence and the sea. That is the version of rum we like to remember. It is even, in its way, fun. From here on, it stops being fun. Up to this point, this has been a story about garbage, sailors and pirates. From here, it becomes something else. Let us go back to the molasses. By the early 1700s, a triangle had formed across the Atlantic Ocean. It was not a rigid route that every ship followed. It was a system, a set of connected trades, and it worked like this. Molasses, the byproduct of Caribbean sugar, was shipped north to the distilleries of New England. In towns like Newport, Rhode Island, that molasses was turned into rum. Newport, a town of only a few thousand people, came to have more than 20 distilleries running at once. The smell of fermenting molasses hung over the whole harbor. That rum was then loaded onto ships and carried east, across the ocean, to the coast of West Africa. And on that coast, the rum was traded, not for goods, for people. The enslaved men, women and children purchased with New England rum were packed into the same ships and carried west across the Atlantic in the crossing we now call the Middle Passage. Those who survived were sold in the Caribbean and the Americas. They were forced to labor on the sugar plantations. Their labor produced the sugar and the molasses that was shipped north to be turned into more rum, and the cycle closed and began again. Rum was not a side effect of this system, it was the fuel. The distillers of New England produced a specific product for this exact purpose, a high-strength, harsh spirit that they knew perfectly well no colonist wanted to drink. It was called Guinea rum, made to be traded on the Guinea coast of Africa. That was the reason for it. That was the reason I told you no colonist would willingly drink it. It was never meant for them. If you are finding this video difficult, that is the correct response. But stay with it, because this happened, and it built things that still stand. The scale is hard to hold in your mind. Rhode Island alone was responsible for the clear majority of all the slaving voyages launched from British North America. The fortunes of some of the most respected families in New England, families whose names are on universities and streets and institutions to this day, were built in part on this trade. And it is important to understand why rum, specifically, was so useful in it. On the West African coast, European traders could not simply arrive and take. They had to trade with African merchants and rulers who set their own terms and knew the value of what they were selling. Those traders wanted specific goods, textiles, iron, firearms, and alcohol. Rum was compact. It did not spoil on the long voyage. It was always in demand and, crucially, the New England distillers could produce it in effectively unlimited quantity from a waste product. A merchant in Newport could turn cheap molasses into a currency that was accepted 4,000 miles away on another continent. Few trade goods in history have been so grimly efficient. The Sally, the ship we started with, is one of the few voyages we can see in detail because the merchants who owned her, the Brown family of Providence, kept meticulous records. Those records survive. We know how many people were loaded aboard. We know how many died. The voyage was, by the standards of the trade, a financial failure. More than half of the enslaved people aboard did not survive it. Some died of disease, some died in an uprising, some, according to the ship's own accounts, chose the sea over what waited for them. I mean, think about that for a second. We know these numbers because they were written down as a loss, in a ledger, as accounting. There is one more thing that has to be said, because it completes the horror. Rum did not only buy the enslaved, it was also forced upon them. On the plantations, rum was used as a ration, handed to enslaved people as part of the machinery of control, the same spirit that had purchased them now used to keep them working. The drink in your cabinet was, for the better part of 2 centuries, one of the most important commodities in the largest forced migration in human history. Nobody was ever really punished for this. The trade was legal, it was respectable, it made men rich, and those men died in comfort and were buried under stones that said nothing about how the money was made. Here is the part that Americans, in particular, are rarely taught. Rum helped start the United States. By the 1700s, New England's rum industry depended on cheap molasses, and the cheapest molasses came from the French Caribbean, not the British. This annoyed London. So in 1733, Parliament passed the Molasses Act, a heavy tax on molasses imported from non-British colonies, designed to force the New England distillers to buy more expensive British molasses instead. The colonists responded the way they would respond to every tax that followed. They ignored it. They smuggled. Molasses smuggling became so widespread, so organized, and so openly accepted that the law was essentially meaningless. Then, in 1764, Parliament tried again with the Sugar Act, tightening the rules and, crucially, actually trying to enforce them. And this time, it landed on a colonial economy that was already tense, already resentful, and already in the habit of treating British trade law as an insult to be evaded. The Sugar Act came 1 year before the Stamp Act, and together they lit the fuse. The slogan we remember is "No taxation without representation." The commodity underneath a great deal of that anger was molasses, and the rum it was made into. John Adams himself wrote years later that he did not know why anyone should be ashamed to admit that molasses was an essential ingredient in American independence. An essential ingredient in American independence. His words. There is a bitter irony buried in that. Before the Revolution, the average adult colonist drank a staggering quantity of rum, by some estimates, several gallons of pure spirit per person per year. Rum was not an occasional indulgence. It was woven into daily life, into work, into medicine, into politics. Election days were greased with it. It was, for a time, almost the national drink of a nation that did not yet exist. After independence, rum's long reign slowly ended. American drinkers shifted to whiskey, made from grain grown on the expanding frontier, which no longer depended on Caribbean molasses or British trade law. When the new government tried to tax that whiskey in the 1790s, frontier farmers rose up in armed rebellion, the same reflex against a spirit tax that had helped push the colonies toward revolution a generation before. But rum itself faded from the center of American life, pushed west and out of fashion by a grain spirit that owed nothing to the Caribbean. But in the Caribbean, its story was only entering its most famous chapter. In 1862, in Santiago de Cuba, a man named Facundo Bacardi Masso began experimenting with ways to make rum smoother, lighter, and more consistent. He filtered it through charcoal. He aged it in oak. He tamed the hot, hellish, and terrible liquor into something clean enough for the modern world. The Bacardi family built an empire on it, and the light, mixable rum they created is the reason rum could become the base of the cocktail. This is the quiet turning point in how rum feels to us today. The old rum, the kill devil of Barbados, was a spirit you endured. Bacardi's rum was a spirit you enjoyed. It could disappear into a drink, carry other flavors, mix with fruit and sugar and ice. Almost every rum cocktail you can name, the daiquiri, the Cuba Libre, the mojito, the piña colada, depends on this lighter style. The transformation from a hot, hellish liquor into the friendly base of a beach drink was not an accident of taste. It was engineered deliberately by people selling a product. And selling a product means selling a story, and the story they chose to sell had no molasses in it, and no ships and no coast of Africa. Then came Prohibition. When the United States banned alcohol in 1920, the rum-producing islands of the Caribbean, just offshore, became the source. Fast boats ran rum across the water into the United States by night. The men who did it were called rum runners, and the phrase entered the language. For over a decade, rum flowed illegally into a country that had officially sworn off it. And then, one more turn. In 1959, the Cuban Revolution swept the island. The new government seized private industry, and the Bacardi family, whose fortune was tied up in Cuba, lost their distilleries and their homeland. They had, with great foresight, registered their trademark and moved assets abroad. So Bacardi went into exile, rebuilt in Puerto Rico and beyond, and became one of the largest spirits companies on earth, a company without a country, carrying the name of a Cuba it could no longer return to. Today, rum is sold to you as sunshine. It is the drink of the beach, the cruise, the tiki bar, the tropical vacation. The marketing is relentless and it is deliberate. Rum has been wrapped, more thoroughly than almost any other spirit, in an image of pure, uncomplicated pleasure. Palm trees, turquoise water, escape, and that image sits directly on top of the actual history and hides it almost perfectly. Look at the labels. A striking number of rum brands still carry the names of plantations, of estates, of the islands and families and places where this spirit was born out of sugar and slavery. Most people pouring a glass have no idea that the pleasant, exotic-sounding name on the bottle is often a direct reference to the world that produced it. The tiki bars are worth pausing on because they are the purest example of the trick. In the 1930s and 40s, entrepreneurs in California invented an entirely fictional tropical paradise, all bamboo and torches and carved idols, and built it around rum. It was a fantasy of the South Seas assembled from props, and it had nothing to do with the real Caribbean and everything to do with helping Americans forget the prohibition they had just endured, and, though no one said it aloud, the history the rum itself carried. The tiki bar sold escape. What people were escaping, in part, was the truth of the drink in their hand. The Royal Navy poured its last daily rum ration on the 31st of July, 1970. The sailors wore black armbands. They called it Black Tot Day. After more than 300 years, the ration that had run through the age of sail, the great wars, and the building and losing of an empire was quietly ended, because modern sailors operating modern weapons could not do their jobs half a pint of overproof rum into the afternoon. And in Rhode Island, in the towns that grew rich on Guinea rum, the reckoning came slowly and late. Universities and institutions built partly on the profits of the trade have, in recent years, begun to investigate and acknowledge where some of their founding money came from. The ledgers of ships like the Sally have been studied, published, and turned into memorials, so that the numbers written down as a financial loss can finally be read as what they actually were. Rum was garbage that became a fortune. It was the fuel of the largest forced migration in human history. It financed a revolution, survived a prohibition, and outlived the empire that drank it every single day for 3 centuries. And it is sitting in your cabinet right now, behind a label with a palm tree on it, waiting to be poured into something sweet on a warm evening, while almost nobody remembers that the pleasant word on the bottle was once handed across a beach in Africa in exchange for a human life. The Sally sailed in September of 1764. She carried 17,000 gallons of rum out, and she was meant to carry people back. Most of them did not survive the voyage. The rum did. It always did. It is the thing that lasted. Now you know what it cost. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. We publish a new deep dive into the hidden history of everyday food and drink every week. Leave a comment and tell me whether you had ever heard the phrase Black Tot Day before this, and give the video a like so more people find the real story. Thank you for watching.